Good morning, everybody. One of the things that we are going to start with this morning is talking about an introduction to research. I strongly believe that research is one of the most important things in debate, and really, good research is what separates exceptional debaters from mediocre debaters. So I want to go through with you this morning some steps for good research. As we do some activities later, you'll actually put these practices into work, and then we'll obviously have question and answers later this afternoon as well for anything that you don't think you are yet comfortable with, maybe some thoughts or ideas that you want to have. I really want this to be a collaborative research effort. So what you're hearing now is obviously just my voice. The PowerPoint will be accessible to you as a file. If you have not done that yet, go ahead and pause the video, which has my voice on it, and make sure you get the PowerPoint up. We'll share that file with you, and then we'll click through the slides. So I'll tell you when to change slides, I'll talk you through the entire presentation, and we'll go from there. So go ahead and move on to the second slide, hoping you are in there. First and foremost, when researching, ask yourself, what do I want to do? The best research is focused research. So you need to decide if you want to either A, browse, just kind of when you're first hear a topic, you want to maybe get some very basic information about it. You might want to locate a specific piece of information, which means that you've maybe already done some topic work and you just need one very specific card for an argument that you're trying to make. Or if you want to retrieve everything you can on the subject, which again might be something you want to do before a big tournament, maybe before an SDA district or before a national tournament that your team would be attending. But having these three different scopes of whether you're just kind of browsing, seeking information, looking for something specific, or trying to get absolutely everything you possibly can is extremely important for you to be able to decide where you want to start and how you want to approach that research. So we'll talk about as we go through. The goal is just for you to have an idea of what the purpose of your research is. So that's priority number one. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. When my students are browsing, I tend to call this umbrella research. Okay, umbrella research, obviously, because you're just trying to find a lot of things that fall under a general topic. So for example, we haven't discussed the topics yet, but one of the topics that we will be working with this week is if Supreme Court justices should have term limits. So really, if I'm doing umbrella research on a topic like that, I might want to just start with understanding maybe how many Supreme Court justices there are, what their role is, what their current term limit is. If I don't understand those things, then my research from there forward is really unproductive. So if you don't know a lot about the topic, there are a few places that you can start, and they're listed on this slide. First would be a quick Google search. Okay. Obviously, you can just Google Supreme Court Justice term limits. You might find a few articles you want to read. It's usually one of the easiest and fastest ways to kind of obtain just general umbrella information. If you have access to briefs, which is something we can talk about later in the Q&A if that's something you have specific questions about, they frequently produce topic analyses or a single topic analysis in each of the briefs. What this does is kind of give a perspective from someone who's not only familiar with debate, but familiar with the topic, has done that quick Google search, has probably done some more advanced and in-depth research, and really that topic analysis is something that you can read that kind of gets your gears turning. For coaches as well, this is frequently an assignment that I give to my students. As soon as a topic analysis comes out, we read the topic analysis, we analyze it, we discuss it. It becomes a really great, easy reading assignment that provides a place to start and points you in a direction. Now, I will caution you regarding the briefs and the topic analysis that might be one person's opinion. So they might be interpreting a word in the resolution or a phrase in the resolution on a specific way that might be something you change or alter later in the research process. But really, the idea of having a place to start in a few very cohesive, coherent pages is extremely beneficial. Also, Wikipedia is certainly something that you can cite in terms of your initial research. Obviously, you don't want to cite it in a round. right? You don't want to say, oh, according to Wikipedia, this happened. And a lot of teachers and coaches are for some reason shying away from Wikipedia. But really, if you want to try to mess with it one day, try to type some false information into Wikipedia and see how fast they fix it. The editors are getting paid more and more because of the number of hits and the number of advertisers. And Wikipedia is becoming a more reputable source every single day. You still should find the internal source or citation when we actually get into the citing element of it, but in terms of going to a Wikipedia page for maybe the United States Supreme Court, that is never a bad idea to get a good basis or background of information. If you have a more specific topic, maybe one that would lend to reading the Policy Almanac, which talks a lot about specific governmental policies, that's a great place to go. I have the link right there on that side if you want to look around. But for example, if you wanted to look at the most recent Hobby Lobby decision, which I know is highly contested, probably by all of us, you can click on that link. You could go read about that specific new piece of legislation or new Supreme Court ruling, and that would be a good place to go to kind of get some feedback on that. And then finally, CQ Researcher. I'm not sure how familiar any of you are about it, but it is great in terms of providing basic information both for and against issues. There is also a CQ Global Researcher, and it's just a very broad, here's a lot of information about a topic, but let me explain it to you in a very clear way. So those are places that you can start as competitors and coaches. You can definitely direct your students to just kind of get that browsing step done. Go ahead and change slides. We'll move on. Kind of in that same vein, I feel like a lot of students and coaches alike are not very skilled at using search engines. And really, a search engine, obviously Google is the most prominently used, and Google is arguably the best in terms of what they have access to. But these little tips and tricks are things that most people do not know or do not remember. How to use search engines is the title. That should be where you are. The first is to use Boolean search OR to search results. So maybe you want to type in United States Supreme Court or SCOTUS, SCOTUS, which is the abbreviation or acronym for the Supreme Court of the United States. If you're using OR, it will actually search both of those terms interchangeably, which always gives you broader results. The same thing, use the plus or minus sign to broaden or restrict results. So maybe you want United States Supreme Court justices, but I don't want decisions, because I'm simply talking about the way that the justices interact, how long they're in that position for, any articles that are specifically about their term limits. But if I put minus decisions, it will avoid any article that is specifically talking about a Supreme Court decision. And using that little plus or minus sign is a really easy, simple way. This third little tip for search engines, I think just about everybody knows, but it's using quotation marks to search for a specific phrase. It's very easy to put quotation, United States Supreme Court Justice term limit, end quotation. By having those quotations there, it's only going to search for that phrase as a whole. So you're going to find only things that would be about United States Supreme Court Justice term limits. So they can be really, really useful. I think this next one is a great tip that one of my really good friends told me in grad school, and I had never thought about this before, but you can actually use the site to search for a specific website. So this would be in an advanced search, which we'll get to in a second, but you can also just type in site : and then type in .edu or .gov. If you are looking for specific data, for example, for an education topic, you could type in edu and you would only find data from colleges or universities. If you wanted something that you needed, let's say a card specifically from the government and their stance on Supreme Court justice term limits, you could type in .gov and it would only search pages that were operated by the federal government that have that extension. So that's huge in terms of restricting your results with a really easy little few letters. The next is using parts of a word. Let's say you wanted to search for democracy, democratic, and those type of implications on a Supreme Court justice term limit. You could actually type in DEMO and then asterisk, and it would allow you to, it would search for democracy, democratic, or any other words, Democrat, even potentially if you were looking for specific partisan or bipartisan perspectives on the issue. But anytime you put an asterisk at the end of a word, it searches that root or that prefix of the word with anything that might come after it. So it just gives you some new options. The I'm Feeling Lucky button on Google has actually been relocated a little further down on the page, but the I'm Feeling Lucky button can also be really helpful when you're doing this initial research. If you want to type in the whole topic of a resolution and then type I'm feeling lucky, what you'll probably find is a topic analysis. You might find where the topic is presented because that's the only place it would be in its whole form. But you might be surprised, and it just takes you to the first or most popular result or what Google thinks will be the best result. So sometimes I tell my students, and we have a challenge or a game you all can play with your friends, teachers, coaches. I think this is something that you could definitely use, where you try to see who can find the best card or the best piece of evidence just with the I'm Feeling Lucky button. So what that does is it really challenges them to get in and play with the words that they're using, the way that they're typing in Boolean search terms, etc. That's really useful. I mentioned the advanced search link earlier. The advanced search link will give you options such as date, author, do you want it in a title, are you specifically looking for something from X, Y, or Z file. Another search that we didn't really talk about up there is you could type in PDF. If you want to make sure that .pdf, that's the file extension, so maybe you're only getting scholarly research. There's a bunch of things to do there. Google Scholar is extremely useful. Google Scholar has tons of academic journals that they've uploaded. It is one of the best free resources we have. Your activity that you're going to do in a little while, you will actually be using Google Scholar for that, and I'm going to have you do a date search where you actually go into Google Scholar, pick a date range for articles, and then find something that's more recent. And Google Scholar functions just like Google, it just only searches the academic articles specifically. You can also search in Google News. It's a great place to find really recent articles if you're looking for something like a Supreme Court ruling that just happened. Google Books has sometimes full books uploaded. You can't copy and paste, which makes the card cutting a little more tedious, but you can absolutely open it in a window and then retype it in a Word document. And even Google Images sometimes, if you're looking for charts, graphs, some type of, maybe they have pictures of articles. I have found some really awesome things just by being creative in how you search. And then Google Reader, it was actually shut down recently, but I have heard rumors that they're opening it back up. And what Google Reader does is, let's say you have an entire semester, I know those of you that are debating UIL in Texas on a specific topic, you can have all of the articles about a specific topic sent to your Google Reader every day, which is just kind of a website or a homepage. And you can do the same thing. You can set up Google Alerts, and I can answer more questions about any of these later. But like I said, Google Reader you can't access right now, but rumor is they're revamping it and it might come back. So if that's the case, that's certainly something that I would encourage all of you to check out. So those are just kind of my tips and tricks for search engines. We'll kind of talk a little bit more about specific other places you can go. I know those are Google heavy, but I really do believe that if you can learn how to Google search well, that's the first step in exceptionally good research. All right, let's switch to slide number 5, which is called Search Specifics. I'll make sure everybody's caught up on the right slide. Okay, the thing that works really, really well about these 5 things is that you need to consider other things that you can not only type into Google search, but you can kind of look for maybe articles or research about. The first is keywords. If we are researching, excuse me, I'm yawning. It has nothing to do with you, I promise. If you are researching a specific topic, such as the United States Supreme Court Justice term limits, there might be some other keywords that you want to look into. Maybe you want to look into presidential term limits. Maybe you want to look into Supreme Court appointments. Maybe you want to type in Sotomayor and look specifically at her opinion on something. I would strongly consider making a list of 10 to 15 to 20 keywords that you can search for that might not be specifically in the resolution of a given topic, but are certainly external concepts and ideas that would be pertinent to research on that topic. Another thing is authors. You can easily do an author search in Google Scholar. In the advanced search in Google, you can actually type in author : and try to find a specific author of an article or a website. But let's say that you find a really good card by one author. Okay, that's really where this comes in. If I find one author that maybe has done a lot of academic research on Supreme Court Justice term limits, I might want to search for any other information that that article or that author has produced, because that is a place that I know they're familiar with the topic. I know their writing resonates with me and what I'm trying to do. So it really becomes a kind of gateway to more beneficial information. Synonyms are huge. Kind of what I was talking about earlier when using SCOTUS instead of the United States Supreme Court. So the synonyms don't apply as much here as they would in, let's say, another topic where maybe I'm talking about regional conflict, and instead of regional conflict, I want to put in regional strife, maybe regional violence. Any type of synonyms, those are always really good. Again, teachers, that's a great activity. Maybe give your students the topic, okay, and have them rewrite the topic using completely different words. So you have an entire rewritten topic of synonyms, which really allows for some strategizing as a team or as a class where you can share those better ways to do research. For umbrella topics, that's a little different than umbrella research. By that, I just mean maybe you need to look at the Supreme Court in general, or if we're talking about conflict in the Middle East, maybe I just need to look at United States foreign policy in the Middle East, because that would potentially address the conflict in the Middle East. So maybe you need to go a little bit bigger in scope, a little wider in scope, to be able to really target and get into some of the extremely quality research that you're looking for. And then the last thing that I always encourage my students to do, and I think we don't do enough, I mentioned this when talking about Wikipedia, but there are specific hyperlinks and embedded links within articles. I don't know if you've ever been reading an article and you notice that the article, there's like a reference to maybe a previous article and it's blue and underlined. It's not just blue and underlined because it looks pretty, okay? It's blue and underlined because you can click on it and it takes you to that previous article that they're referencing. Some of you might be like, oh, I do that all the time, but some of you might have no clue that that's even something that's possible, and it absolutely is. There are always embedded links and hyperlinks. At the bottom of a Wikipedia page, you have about 100 different links sometimes that you can go for further research. Don't be afraid to click on those. The author put them there for a reason. They're almost always connected, and they are really strategic in kind of furthering your research in a very natural progression. So these are just 5 little things to kind of consider. All right, go ahead and flip to the next slide. Slide 6 on your PowerPoint. It's called Where Do I Do Research? These 6 places are easy places to do research. That they might be pretty obvious to you, but I always feel like 1 or 2 get left out, so I like discussing them. And then in a few seconds after we get through this slide, I'll actually go through and talk to you a little bit about each of those different types of formats and vehicles for research and give you some samples of places to go for. So the first are periodicals. A lot of people think that newspapers are a periodical, and some of them are, most of them are, but there are other periodicals, such as magazines, such as even blogs that gets produced periodically. That's really what they mean. Newspapers are often a lost art. People very easily go to the New York Times, but they forget about really great articles or really great newspapers such as the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, the LA Times. There's a lot of different Boston Globe. We'll talk about a few more of those later, but newspapers are still some of the greatest places for very fast journalism. And I know the internet has kind of changed that, but all of those newspapers now have websites that you can access. Government publications, we talked a little bit about those. The government is always producing policy reports. The government is frequently producing like quarterly reports and research on a plethora of different topics. We sometimes forget about going to the whitehouse.gov website and digging around when we have political topics. So those are huge, just in terms of making sure that you are getting the best quality information possible. Polls aren't as useful in LD as they sometimes are in other debate events like Public Forum, but I do think that they can be persuasive, specifically when we are talking about issues that maybe affect an entire country, or maybe if you want to be able to make the argument that we need to deal with an individual's quality of life, an individual's value of being, standard of living, things like that. The polls can really be useful, even if as an extension in a later speech in an LD round. Think tanks such as the Brookings Institute, there's a few more I'll list you later. Those are great places to go that have done extensive, copious amounts of research and really often, again, get forgotten about. And then databases. You should absolutely 100%, if you're taking notes as I'm talking, you should write this down. What databases do I have at my school? Teachers and coaches, you should know, I hope you know. One of the very first things I do the second week of school, usually once we kind of get through our icebreakers and the syllabus, is I take every single one of my classes to the library or the media center, whatever you call it, and they will sit with the librarian, and the librarian will tell them how to access all of the databases that our school has access to. That might seem antiquated. A lot of your students will probably know how to access them, but that doesn't mean that they know the passwords, which the librarians could give you, and that certainly doesn't mean that they know the benefits of each of them, which again the librarians will discuss. They also love you coming down there, right? They get bored. They don't have classes that come see them nearly as much as they used to anymore. And I know a lot of schools have no longer have librarians. They have media specialists that are now very in on everything relating to the internet, to research, to all the computers. But you must know what databases you have access to at your school. I cannot tell you enough how important that knowledge is. And all of you should make that a priority to knowing which specific ones. Moreover, if you can convince your coach or your principal teachers to get access to some of the great databases like LexisNexis, you might be able to even share those with maybe a few neighboring schools. I know that's something that a few of us do down here. If we buy a subscription to something, we share that depending on how many people can access things, and that really allows us to get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of getting the most quality resources possible. So make sure you know what databases you have access to, and then again maybe push for some additional options to accessing them, certainly using your media specialists or librarians in the process. All right, switch to the next page. These next few slides are talking about periodicals, and they say things like many will give you access to the articles simply by creating an account, but they're not giving you exactly what needs to happen for all of them. Some of them you have to pay to get past a certain number of articles, so I clearly didn't put all of that information on there. I'm just giving you kind of a list of a good group of places where I think you can start in terms of that type of research, but obviously they each have their own requirements in terms of access, payment, and how much you can really get out of them. The periodicals list: The Economist, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Harvard International Review, Brown Journal of World Affairs. If you notice, both the Harvard International Review, the Harvard Business Review, that Brown Journal of World Affairs, and the MIT Sloan Management Review, those are all created by those specific schools. So those are publications that are frequently done by graduate students, sometimes by undergraduate students, and they are very quality articles and discussions of topics that my kids use all of the time. Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, Business Week. Obviously, some of those are laughable by some people, specifically things like, I don't know, U.S. News and World Report. But what I will say and what I tell my students is that they can be a great resource because they've frequently done cover issues or cover stories on the topics. Those need to be accessed. Those need to be read. You might not be citing them in a round, but you need to be doing research there to get that information and get that ground basic level so you can become familiar with a specific topic. So these periodicals can do a lot of that umbrella research for you with some of the more sophisticated ones, such as the Brown Journal of World Affairs, which really gets into very specific politics of international relations. Those can do a little bit different level of research. But the periodicals themselves are kind of a hit and miss, but certainly worthy of trying. Switch to the next slide. This one is entitled Congressional Magazines. This is huge for political topics like the United States Supreme Court Justice ones. Some people don't know that these exist. Okay, these are not necessarily government documents, but they are magazines that are created by members of Congress or people that are also in D.C. and affiliated in some way, form, or fashion. So you have Roll Call, Congressional Quarterly, which you can actually get a pretty cheap subscription of. American Spectator, American Prospect are written by Democrats and Republicans accordingly. Obviously, they have differing views on Supreme Court justice term limits. Those usually change based on the makeup of the Supreme Court, but you can certainly look into both of those. The archived articles require a subscription, but the recent articles you can access. And Politico is great. My extempors love it. All of my debaters love it in LD, PF, and Policy for the up-to-date information that they get. Obviously, you need to consider source bias when talking about some of these, specifically the congressional magazines. There's obviously a conservative or negative slant to some of them. Some of them are honest about that conservative negative slant, some of them are not. So make sure you as competitors are aware of that, and teachers and coaches that you are telling your students to be cognizant of these biases that are potentially ingrained in their research, but it's debate, right? You have to make sure that we are being, what's the best word I'm looking for here? You have to make sure that you are being careful, but also that you're being brave, okay? Because sometimes the card that you need is a perspective that is only shared by one side of the political spectrum. That's okay. That's where you'll find your best card, and you need to be comfortable with allowing your students to make that argument. All right, let's switch to slide number 9, government organizations. There seems to be a handful of domestic topics this year, and specifically for LD, but from the NFL, and I know the UIL has their own topics. But the idea of government organizations and the reports that they produce can be extremely useful. The Government Accountability Office specifically talks about the ins and outs, the logistics of the government, decisions that the government's making, government policies. Congressional Budget Office would be anything that has to do with finances or legislation that Congress can pass and the monetary implications of that. And then any other branch directly related to the topic. So let's say we're debating about healthcare. Obviously, the National Institute of Health would be beneficial. If we're debating about the environment or specific policies regarding GMOs or food quality, the EPA would be a good place to go for that. I know vaccinations are something that were being considered. I don't think they're on the master list, which we'll talk about later, but obviously, I want this to be useful for you, not just this year. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention would be a place you could look there. Federal Reserve has to do with the economy. They have lots of great policy packets that they produce from the Federal Reserve. The Bureau of Labor Statistics would have things about employment, about minimum wage. In the Department of Labor, again, similar concepts as discussed in both of those. So these are really great places just to kind of bookmark, have this PowerPoint slide, be able to present them to your students, for teachers and coaches, and all of you when you are doing government-specific research to kind of look in and see what you can find. Okay, switch to the next slide, which is talking about polls. There are 5 polls that we use specifically in places where you can kind of find those. I think one of the things I do want to discuss a little later when we have our Q&A and discussion about today is kind of the validity of these polls, and I know I referenced it a few minutes ago, but there is growing value in them, specifically when we are dealing with topics, like I mentioned earlier, that actually affect the public. And if you are doing more progressive national style LD, which I know a couple of you are, there are certainly going to be link scenarios that you need to explain in terms of when certain things are going to matter. And these polls could certainly provide that bridge for you, right? To say that this matters because the civilians care about it, or this matters because this many people are actually affected. And polls can kind of be that piece of information. So you have the Roper Center for Public Opinion, which is actually from the University of Connecticut, but they have a lot of great research that they're doing all of the time. You've all probably heard of Gallup, especially those of you that are not graduating and will be around for the 2016 presidential election. Gallup will have a lot of information there. They're one of the main political polling places. Harris Interactive has polls that they do a lot online, but you can actually participate in some, and they have pretty substantiated claims that they make with a lot of back research. They tell you their sample size, they give you a lot of specific information, and I think you'll really appreciate that. National Opinion Research Center and Pew Research Center are very similar in terms of the fact that they're doing political, international, and domestic polls, and all of those are beneficial, like I mentioned, for some of the specific topics. So we can kind of bookmark those. Know that the same disclaimer I gave about some of the liberal and conservative sources is the same disclaimer I would give about the polls, right? That you have to consider the source of the poll, the frame of the poll, what questions are these individuals being asked, how many people were asked, what percentage of the actual demographic do they make up. If you are using some of that research, you must be prepared to answer those questions, but I don't think that that's a reason you should be deterred from using this type of information. All right, the next slide is called think tanks. You've probably heard of a lot of these. Okay, this is slide 11. The same disclaimer applies to these almost as much as it does with the congressional research. Okay, the think tanks have very distinct, some of them liberal or conservative stances, that they are not just kind of hidden, they are very clear that they are a liberal think tank or a conservative think tank, and you need to do some research and make sure you're familiar with those. But some of the best research you will find is produced by these think tanks. The Hoover Institute at Stanford, Urban Institute, Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, Brookings Foundation, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Center for American Progress, Human Rights Watch, Council on Foreign Relations, which actually the NSDA now has a relationship with. You can look more on that on the NSDA's website. The RAND Corporation, the Belfer Center, which is at Harvard, and then the Center for Global Development. These are some of my favorite places to go. I will tell you that it's not always being able to Google and type United States Supreme Court Justice term limits, Brookings Institute. That might work, but a lot of times because these articles are not viewed as much as other articles on the web, perhaps because they have search engines on all of their own websites that they really aren't concerned about search terms and people accessing them as easily on Google. Something I would definitely do is go to these specific websites, use their own search engines, their own search mechanisms to try to find something specific. And as you kind of get into them and explore, you'll become more familiar with what each of them specializes in and some of the biggest places where they have research, which will really kind of help you have a targeted goal in mind when you're visiting these specific think tank websites. So again, bookmark these, keep these, write them down, use them. They are extremely beneficial and some of the best places you can get information. Okay. These, go to the next slide, slide number 12. It's called free databases, or databases, however you say it. As I told you earlier, I grew up in Texas. I always thought I said databases. I think now I say databases. I don't really know. These are 4 free databases: the Berkeley Electronic Press, Social Sciences Research Network, and Econ Papers. Those are going to allow you to access them just like you would be able to access Google Scholar, which I know we talked about earlier pretty extensively. It's there at the bottom. Those are links that you can follow. Those databases would be in addition to the ones that all of you are going to ask your librarian or media specialist about. So check those out. Again, they have more specific advanced searches. You can use the Boolean search concepts that we discussed previously, and they are all places where you can go to ensure that you have a plethora of information at your fingertips. The next slide is kind of an addendum of the databases. The National Bureau of Economic Research. You can use their site to search for working papers, okay? So you can actually use the working paper number or the Google number, which you can find on Google if it has the Google search number. And the National Bureau of Economic Research will have a lot of really cool things if you're talking about financial monetary implications to maybe U.S. or domestic economies. And there's certainly that there. Okay, slide 14. We referenced some of the school databases that you might have access to. Some of those are probably Academic Search Premier, InfoTrack, Business Search Premier, LexisNexis. I'm trying to think of one. Oh, we have GaleNet at our school, which is pretty good. But ask, okay? I cannot emphasize this enough. So many students go through high school not using the resources that they have available to them. What that's doing is setting you up or setting your students up to go to college and not use the resources you have available. Something else that you can do. If you have an older sibling that goes to any college or university, ask your older sibling for access to their databases. If you have a family member that is an attorney, they probably have access to LexisNexis. I'm very thankful to be married to one. My students frequently say, hey, can you see if Tim can get us this article off of Lexis? And frequently he can, because he has access to it with his law firm's account. Okay, they can be expensive, these database access accounts. But you must use them and figure out how you can best provide access to them, because a lot of times the best research you're going to get will be from these databases. One other thing real quick, under LexisNexis, you'll notice on this slide, the Congressional LexisNexis provides access to congressional research, and the legal LexisNexis provides access to law reviews. So the law reviews could be about any type of even domestic or foreign policy that you are interested in, but congressional would be specifically from the congressional perspective, which again, it would depend topic by topic which one of these is going to work the best for you, but I will say that both of them have value, and there are subscriptions where you have access to both. For example, my husband can't access the congressional ones at his law firm, but he can access the legal ones, but then we just use older siblings of some of my debate team members to access the congressional ones. So those are definitely 2 different routes that you can go specifically with LexisNexis. Okay. Go ahead and go to slide 15. Slide 15 discusses alternative mechanisms for research. These are people that you can talk to or places that you can go. And this is kind of one of my little soapboxes that I feel is extremely important. I know the NSDA encourages this as well. It's kind of getting everyone involved in the debate process. One of my favorite things that we've done this year at the NSDA is this whole Spark Leaders campaign. And one of the ways that you can be a leader at your school is really to make it known that you are a member of the debate team and that you find and value the people at your school to help you in this quest, right? I don't know, some of you might be on a debate team with one person, you might be on a debate team with 50 people, okay? But regardless of how many of those people you are on a team with, you want to represent your school and your team as best as you possibly can. And one of the ways that you can do that is by utilizing teachers and librarians at your school. If you have a topic that is talking about United States Supreme Court Justice term limits, you should absolutely be talking to your U.S. government teachers. Go ask them. Say, hey, here's this topic that I'm debating. Tell me your thoughts on both sides. What they will probably do, first of all, is give you 20 different materials. A lot of times they'll have books or they'll have research, maybe even research they did in college that they can hand you. And then they'll want to talk to you about it. And then this happens. They'll be emailing your debate coach and they'll say, hey, I heard your kids were debating about this. Can I maybe watch a round? So then you have someone that is familiar with the topic, that is watching you in a round, that can give you good argumentation, suggestions, and strategy. And that's huge in terms of what you are able to find, what you are able to present later once you get to tournaments, which are obviously more important than just practice rounds. And the practice rounds will help you do better at the tournaments, but they will help you when you're doing them in front of teachers that care and know about the topic. Okay, some of you might not even have a full-time debate coach. I know one or two of you, I think, mentioned that in your information that I had you fill out on the form. Utilizing other teachers in your building as an alternative form of research is huge. The librarians and the media specialists, you need to go beyond just asking them what type of databases your school has access to. You need to ask them where you can find certain pieces of information. If you can't find a card, take it to your librarian. Your librarian will sit down and help you try to find it. They like doing that. They went to school for that, but they are one of the most underutilized research resources at your school. Talk to your parents. Your parents might be teachers, they might be doctors, they might work in a corporation where they have knowledge of a specific subject that you're talking about. I know nobody sits down at the dinner table anymore, but I encourage you to do that. If you're sitting down at the dinner table with your family, once you get home from school or you're driving home from school, talk to your parents about these topics. That's still research, okay? That's still you asking questions about the topic, getting opinions, thinking in different directions of how you need to be approaching concepts. And once you have this list of topics, which you'll receive later this afternoon, it's very simple to kind of start putting together A plus B plus C. Wow, that's a really good argument that I need to write an entire contention on. And your parents, your teachers, and your librarians are all great resources for that. And then the last thing I kind of listed here under alternative research is books, like actual books. Go to your school library, go to your community library. It's surprising to me how many people don't know how to use a card catalog or a library search engine. There are tons of books written on every topic you could ever possibly want to have a book written on, and those books can be some of the best places for research. Sometimes they're not as recent, and a lot of them, like I said, are electronic or online, and that's really how they're accessed these days. But you have to use all of your resources, and books are most definitely one of them. So I call these alternative research because they are extremely important places that you need to not forget you also have access to. Okay, so go ahead and move to our last slide, slide 16. Slide 16 is just a little recap slide. Some things that you definitely need to remember. Okay, first, what type of research you're doing. Are you browsing? Are you searching for a specific card? Or are you trying to get as much information as possible on the topic? That will tell you where to start. Okay. The second thing you need to remember is to be adventurous, be creative, try different words, try different topics, try different places that you can go for any word that you think might be related, or any type of indirectly related topic area that might help you do research. Okay. The third thing, which we didn't really talk about in depth yet, is don't be discouraged. I have students come up to me all the time. Mrs. West, I can't find this card. Well, as a teacher, we have a couple of options. I can either A, help them find the card, or B, I can say, did you try this? Did you try this? Let me write down some search words for you. What about one of these databases? Did you go here? And that becomes a really easy way for me to kind of point them in a new direction. But a lot of times, a card just doesn't exist, which is the second part of that. And students and coaches, you need to realize that as well. Sometimes there just isn't someone that has this opinion that you want to happen. So what you need to make sure you're doing, instead of, I don't know, making up a card, which we'll talk about in our discussion later today when we talk about some of the new evidence rules from the NSDA, you need to make sure that you are not making up research, you're not creating research that doesn't exist, but you're finding a different angle for your argument. Okay? There are 100 ways to view any topic, probably more than that, and multiple arguments under each of those 100 ways. If something isn't working and you can't connect the dots with your research, try something else. Don't get discouraged. It doesn't mean your research skills are terrible, okay? It just means that you need to reapproach it from a different angle. You need to consider it kind of like a puzzle. And not getting discouraged is huge. The last thing that I really want you to remember, kind of as a recap, is to stay organized, okay? One of the videos that you're going to watch actually after this is how to cut a card. It's from Dan Myers from Presentation High School, and what Dan tells you is actually step-by-step instructions of how to take an article and cut it into a usable card for research purposes, for a debate round, and he walks you through step-by-step of how to do that on a computer. It's a great video. I show it to my students, but what it emphasizes is being organized in your research. So many times I have students come up to me and say, hey, I found this really good card, but I lost it. That means that they didn't bookmark it, they didn't print it out, or they didn't cut it. If you're cutting a card right away, or you're copying and pasting information and just making sure that you have it accessible with the author, with the date, with the website, and you're making those citations, okay, that's huge in terms of what you need to be able to provide to find that card later and to use that card in your debate case. Okay? So stay organized, don't lose track of things, don't get discouraged, and make sure you're embracing the trial and error process that is research. So that's all for our research lecture. You'll have about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then you'll need to come back and watch the Cutting a Card lecture, and then I will be back live and we will talk about discuss the current topics for the 2014-2015 season, which I know a lot of you don't know yet. So we'll talk about those. I can answer any questions about research, about cutting cards, about how to do a lot of these things we've talked about this morning, and then you will have an activity this afternoon, and we will be back later today to finalize any other questions. I'm super excited. Hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll be back together soon.